From the New York Times, it's The Headlines. I'm Amelia Nierenberg, in for Tracy Mumford. Today's Thursday, April 17th. Here's what we're covering. The Trump administration is facing new pressure in the courts and from members of Congress over its high-profile deportations to El Salvador. Yesterday, a federal judge issued an ultimatum to the Trump administration in the case of dozens of Venezuelan men who were flown to a prison there earlier this year. The judge, James Boasberg, said he would open an investigation into whether the administration is in contempt of court if it doesn't let the men challenge their deportations. Boasberg had ordered officials to stop their deportation flights last month, but the flights continued. The men had been detained with little to no due process after President Trump invoked a Wartime Powers Act. The Supreme Court later struck down the judge's ruling on procedural grounds, but Boasberg said administration officials can still be held responsible if it turns out they willfully ignored his order. He said he's considering a range of options to determine who specifically disobeyed his instructions. That could include calling in officials to testify under oath. Meanwhile, in El Salvador,
I'm asking President Bukele to do the right thing and allow Mr. Abrego Garcia to walk out of a prison, a man who's charged with no crime, convicted of no crime, and who was illegally abducted from the United States.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, a Democrat from Maryland, traveled to the country to call attention to another controversial immigration case, the Trump administration's wrongful deportation of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. Van Hollen accused the administration of lying when it claimed Abrego Garcia, who was living in Maryland, had ties to a violent gang, and called for his immediate release.
This is an unsustainable and unjust moment, so it cannot continue.
But he said the country's vice president told him that El Salvador will not let Abrego Garcia go, and that he could not visit the notorious prison where the man is being held, even though some Republican officials have been granted access.
Beyond Senator Van Hollen, I'm hearing a number of Democratic members of Congress who are also considering making the trip down to El Salvador, not just to advocate for the release of Mr. Abrego Garcia, but also to continue to use this as a platform to push back more broadly against President Trump's immigration reforms and the way that his administration is hoping to crack down on migrants in the United States.
My colleague Robert Jimison has been reporting from El Salvador on Van Hollen's trip. Robert says that for many Democrats, alarm bells went off earlier this week when President Trump suggested he'd be open to sending even American citizens convicted of violent crimes to El Salvador. And Robert says that Democrats are now trying to use Abrego Garcia's case to draw a line in the sand.
There's concern about if we let this case go through and continue on the trajectory that it is, where is the line? Where is the Trump administration going to stop? And so if they don't put up the fight this time, there's concern that it will give the Trump administration carte blanche to continue to trudge ahead with no obstacles in enacting any sort of policy agenda up to some pretty extreme forms.
The Times has learned that President Trump persuaded Israel to hold off on a major offensive against nuclear sites in Iran. Israel had been planning a days-long bombing campaign against the sites that was set to start as soon as next month. It was designed to slow down Iran's progress toward developing a nuclear weapon. The Israeli attack would have required significant American involvement, and Israel hoped that the U.S. was on board. There were some signs that was the case. The Pentagon had already moved some aircraft carriers and bombers into the region, in part to back Israel up. But as the plans took shape, some of Trump's top aides grew increasingly concerned that the strikes could set off a broader regional conflict and that the U.S. could be drawn into an all-out war. So Trump waved off the attack and, for now, has opted for diplomacy with Iran. He reopened negotiations with the country over its nuclear program last weekend, and top Iranian and U.S. officials will meet this weekend to continue the talks. Now, 3 more quick updates on the Trump administration. The White House is pushing forward with its plan to create special immigration visas that Trump has called gold cards. Trump says the U.S. will sell the cards for $5 million apiece. In exchange, people would get permission to live in the U.S. The project is being led by Elon Musk's team, which is meeting with various agencies to build out an application process for the cards. It marks an expansion of its role, moving beyond cost-cutting efforts to projects designed to raise revenue for the government. Also, the National Institutes of Health has indicated it will cut off hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for research into the health effects of climate change. That will drastically limit the study of what effect extreme climate events like wildfires and heat waves have on human health. A range of conditions, from asthma flare-ups to heart attacks to a higher risk of strokes, have already been linked to climate change. And President Trump's trade policy is facing its largest legal challenge yet. Yesterday, California's governor filed a lawsuit against Trump, saying that his flurry of tariffs is unlawful and should not be enforced. Trump has argued that a 1970s law gives him the power to unilaterally enact new tariffs, but California, which is one of the largest economies in the world, is arguing that, under the Constitution, only Congress has that power.
There being 85 ayes and 63 nays, SB2 is passed to engrossment.
In Texas, school choice activists have scored a major victory as state lawmakers voted to make one of the largest taxpayer-funded voucher programs in the country. If the plan is signed into law, as expected, parents would get thousands of dollars to spend on private school tuition or homeschooling costs. Critics say that this kind of voucher system could strain public school budgets and lead to larger class sizes there. But many conservatives have long argued that vouchers are essential for parents who want to take their kids out of underperforming public schools. That movement picked up steam during the pandemic, as Republicans, in particular, started pushing for more parental control over education. Texas was the last major Republican-led state to enact the vouchers. Now, private school choice advocates say they'll turn their attention to Washington, pushing for a nationwide voucher system. And finally, capybaras, the laid-back, dog-sized rodents, have become a darling of the modern internet. They're plump, they're mostly mellow, and they're, can we just say it, adorable. But in a fast-growing, ritzy suburb of Buenos Aires, Argentina, they've also become a menace, as new development has pushed the animals out of the nearby forest and into the community.
The moment I passed the security gate, there were capybaras grazing on the medians, dozing on the volleyball courts, wading in the artificial lagoons, and I even saw numerous capybara crossing signs.
My colleague Jack Nickus recently went to the suburb to see how it's coping with its capybara crisis.
They have caused traffic accidents, they've eaten people's gardens, and on a few occasions, they have attacked some of the community's dogs. And as a result, now the community is doing something about it. They're deciding to sterilize the capybaras. Their approach to sterilization is to use a drug that was initially designed for pigs before slaughter. They hope that this will work and the capybara's population will slowly fall and get under control. But the reality is they're not exactly sure what the results will be. This drug has never been tested on the capybaras. The growth of capybaras has caused a real debate inside of the community. Some neighbors feel they're a nuisance, but many other neighbors are trying to defend the capybaras, arguing that it's not that the animals invaded our neighborhood, we invaded theirs.
Those are the headlines. Today on The Daily, a look at the government's antitrust case against the tech giant Meta and what its CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, has said on the witness stand. That's next in the New York Times audio app, or listen wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amelia Nierenberg. We'll be back tomorrow.